In the aftermath of the Balkan campaigns in spring 1941, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, led by the Serbian House of Karađorđević, was partitioned, touching off a period of savage ethnic violence, the echoes of which were still reverberating during the bloody conflicts of the 1990s. The two largest ethnic groups, the Croats and Serbs, were put in opposing positions. The Croats, old German and Austrian allies, were given their own state. This was led by the Croatian fascist group, the Ustaša, which had been fighting to overthrow the Serbian-led Yugoslav monarchy for years, and which was now empowered by the Germans and Italians to rid the country of all Serbs, Jews, and other non-Croatian Catholics. The Serb heartland itself was also partitioned, with the remaining territory of Serbia, an enemy of Germany and Austria during World War I, which of course had helped start the conflict, placed under direct German military occupation. Thus, unlike with the Croats, there was little incentive for Serbs to collaborate with the Germans, many instead joining the Chetnik Brigades, a guerrilla faction with the goal of restoring the Serbian monarchy to Yugoslavia. However, just 3 months after the initial occupation and partition, the first alternative to this bleak new status quo would emerge. The Yugoslav partisans of Josip Broz Tito's Communist Party attempted to offer a more positive vision that would appeal to each of Yugoslavia's disparate ethno-religious groups, regardless of their place within the new status quo established by the Germans. The vision Tito offered instead was essentially a prototype for his brotherhood and unity policy of later decades, pitching a utopic socialist model in which the Croats, Serbs, and the rest of the ethnic groups would be equal and would meld their identities to become simply Yugoslavs. This was part of a carrot-and-stick strategy, as the partisans also employed methods to coerce those not yet convinced of the Titoist vision. They forced civilians to choose sides by intentionally provoking German reprisals. For every one of their soldiers killed, the Germans would execute 100 random civilians, while they would execute 50 for every wounded soldier. By attacking the Germans directly and intentionally provoking these reprisals, the partisans essentially forced civilians to join their cause or remain at home and be potentially subject to the German reprisals. This strategy enraged the Serb royalist Chetniks led by Draža Mihailović, also running guerrilla operations against the Germans, but at the same time were trying to keep Serbia's civilian population safe. This led to the Chetniks increasingly collaborating with the Germans, especially once they'd set up a local Serbian puppet state under their military administration. In order to truly offer the revolutionary alternative he was proposing, Tito's partisans switched from guerrilla tactics to territorial warfare. Since the end of July, the partisans had based their operations out of the city of Užice in western Serbia. By the end of September, they'd conquered most of the surrounding region, as well as the region surrounding the nearby town of Krupanj, declaring the Užice Republic. This was a novel occurrence at this point in the war, essentially the first crack in the sphere of influence Germany had built in Europe. Despite being surrounded by enemies, Tito's strategy was not overly focused on military concerns. The idea was to carry out a communist revolution in the territories they controlled, demonstrate their vision for a future Yugoslavia, and win hearts and minds to increase the long-term legitimacy of the partisan movement. For those hesitant to buy in, a healthy amount of coercion was employed as well. Tito abolished most of the existing administrative structures, setting up a local People's Council in each town to manage municipal affairs, though under the Leninist concept of democratic centralism, they would be required to follow Tito's party line. As part of continued attempts to increase their legitimacy with the populace, businesses were reopened, now under party control, as were civil services, information outlets such as newspapers, and entertainment venues such as cinemas. With the Germans' attention now squarely focused on their massive campaign against the Soviet Union, there wasn't much that could be done immediately to counter the events in Užice. The partisan rebel state even had solid funding, having captured over 56 million Yugoslav dinars from a bank vault in the city. This allowed them to avoid having to requisition supplies from the peasantry, something those still fighting guerrilla style, such as the Chetniks, were forced to resort to, damaging their reputation. Despite this advantage, many peasants were still in strong opposition to Tito's regime. Although avoiding forced requisition or collectivization, the peasants were still heavily taxed, a situation not made any easier by the less than ideal living conditions in an enclave surrounded by enemies. The peasants were also among the most vulnerable to German reprisals for partisan attacks. The combination of all of these issues led to many defections to the Chetniks. That being said, even the Chetniks were based on the territory of Tito's new republic. They'd been receiving British support as the representative of the pre-war royalist government. Tito's partisans did not receive any outside support, even from the Soviet Union, which was not only tied up attempting to stop the Germans, but wanted the partisans to work with the British-supported Chetniks. As the Chetniks gathered more and more members who were resentful of the partisans and who wanted a less confrontational movement that would instigate fewer German reprisals, the partisans were left in a weakened position on the ground. Even so, they were diplomatically strengthened, as the Chetniks' on and off collaboration with the Germans made them increasingly untrustworthy in the eyes of the British. On October 27th, the two factions came to a deal. As part of this, Tito offered to unite the factions, with Chetnik leader Mihailovich to be appointed the combined group's military commander. However, Mihailovich declined, worrying that it would turn him and his force into puppets of the communist partisans. The tentative agreement would fall apart within days anyway, with skirmishing now taking place between the factions in the final days of October. Then on November 1st, the tensions exploded into a full-scale battle in Užice. The Chetniks attempted to stage an uprising against the communist regime. This was quickly put down, but it prompted the withdrawal of British support from the Chetniks, though they still were not recognizing or supplying the partisans either. The partisans, though, had no issues with weapons supply, as they'd set up a clandestine weapons factory in the basement of the aforementioned Užice Bank. Now cut off from British supply and having suffered several major defeats in further skirmishes with the partisans, the Chetniks now aligned themselves with the Germans and their puppet regime in Belgrade. This did not last long, however, and the Chetniks soon found themselves fighting both the partisans and the Germans. Meanwhile, the partisans were stockpiling weapons in their nascent republic and digging in for a fight. Berlin was enraged by the creation of a communist rebel state in their sphere of influence, and in late September had launched Operation Užice, a military campaign to capture and destroy communist forces while eliminating their self-proclaimed state. They had made no progress so far against the entrenched partisans. Now, though, even with German strength concentrated on the Soviet campaign, they were able to put together a force strong enough for a full military strike. This also included collaborationist Serb forces from Milan Nedic's puppet regime in Belgrade. The German-led forces attacked in the first weeks of November, advancing from Belgrade toward Užice and Krupanja. Their final assault on Užice commenced on the 25th. The partisans refused to surrender, likely knowing their fate. Still, 4 days later, they were driven out of Užice and forced to retreat. They quickly morphed back into a guerrilla force and fled west, primarily into the mountainous terrain of eastern Bosnia and Montenegro. Tito and the partisans were merely biding their time, reverting to guerrilla tactics and awaiting the next opportunity to repeat their experiment in statecraft. Indeed, the partisans would go on to set up numerous small rebel republics over the next several years, each time forcing the Germans to deploy major forces to snuff them out that were badly needed elsewhere in the German war effort. Eventually, in the war's final years, the partisans would take control of large swaths of territory, proclaiming the restoration of Yugoslavia before the fighting was even over. After the war, Tito's communist regime remained in power, ushering in a new version of Yugoslavia based on Tito's brotherhood and unity concept first tested in Užice, holding together until the tragic renewal of hostilities in the 1990s. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, make sure to hit that like button and please leave a comment. For more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell button so you're notified when the next video is posted. Be sure to check out the project that forms the basis for these videos at apoliticalworldmap.org. And if you can, please sign up for our Patreon so we can keep the videos coming. Thanks again. I'm Alex. I am out.